Welcome back. In this session, what we will be looking at is the preservation of the Quran. What do we mean by the preservation of the Quran? Simply put, it is the protection of the Quran from errors, from interpolations, additions, and subtractions of the content of the Quran. How then was the Quran preserved? You would recall from our last session that the Quran was said to have been revealed in piecemeal within a whole of 23 years, and that is because of the events that were the basis of the revelation of the Quran. How then was the Quran preserved? In the first instance, Allah promised by Himself to protect the Quran from interpolations, and this can be found in various verses of the Quran, some of which are Quran chapter 15 verse 9, where Allah stated that Inna nahna nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. And what does that mean? Surely we have sent down the reminder. Here the Quran is referred to as the reminder. And that is one of the names of the Quran as we stated in our last session. And surely we will protect it. Another verse where Allah has mentioned the protection of the Quran was Quran chapter 41 verse 42, where Allah says, لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ومن خلفه تنزيل من حكيم حميد. And what does that mean? It means that falsehood will not come to it from before or behind it. And before or after it here simply means that while the revelation and even after the revelation, falsehood will never creep into the Quran. From the two verses, you would see that Allah has promised that He Himself is going to preserve the Quran. That is the first instance. The Prophet and his companions adopted various methods as well in preserving the messages of the Quran whenever they were revealed. These methods include, number one, memorization by the prophets. Whenever Angel Jibril appeared to the prophet and revealed the messages of the moment to him, he also ensures that the prophet commits whatever has been revealed unto him to the memory. Another method adopted to preserve the Quran was the memorization of the Quran by the companions. Having memorized the Quran by the prophets, he thereafter recites the content unto the companions, and this as well allows them to memorize the Quran. They did this by learning every details of the Quran that has been read upon them. Also, they learn how to apply the message to their daily life. By so doing, they were able to memorize the Quran quite easily. And needful to say here is that the Arabs, even before the advent of Islam, they were known to commit something into the memory. So this their quality aided their memorization of the Quran as well. In addition to that, the next method that was used to preserve the Quran was public recital. Therefore, during their 5 times daily prayer, the memorized text of the Quran were always recited. Not only that, in public spaces as well, wherever there is need for them to remind themselves of some particular injunctions, they also recite the Quran. And lastly, recording was another method adopted to preserve the Quran. During the lifetime of the Prophet, the Quran, as the contents were being revealed, they were also written down. While some companions did that on their own initiative, some were appointed by the Prophet to record the Quran down. And the chief scribe of the Prophet was Zayd bin Thabit. Zayd bin Thabit. Therefore, the Quran was written down on some available materials, and such materials were pieces of leather, bones of animals, animal skins, and palm leaf stalks. So these are the some of materials that the contents of the Quran were written on, and specifically the ones that the Prophet has appointed to write out the content submit the materials to the Prophet. That is to say, the materials were kept in the Prophet's house. Even though the materials were submitted to the Prophet's house, the Quran was never compiled in a book form. And there are some reasons behind that. Some of these reasons was that the revelation continued until shortly before the Prophet's death. Not only that, some surah, that is some chapters, when I say surah, it means chapters. Some chapters that were revealed while the Prophet was in Mecca continued when he was in Medina. And this would take us to the next point, which is the compilation of the Quran. As has been said, the need for compiling the Quran did not arise because the revelation continues. But why then was the Quran compiled? Many of the Muslims who had memorized the Quran in the Battle of Yamama died, and because of the deaths of these memorizers, there was need for the compilation of the Quran so that the memorized or the content will not be lost. Another reason was the possible extinction of the content of the Quran. As we have said earlier on, that the Quran were written in different materials, and because it is possible that a material gets lost, there was need to compile all the content of the Quran in a book form. This was done during the time of Abu Bakr, the successor of Prophet after his death. Umar ibn al-Khattab, which would later become the second successor of the Prophet's throne as the leader of the Muslim community. And because Umar feared possible extinction of the Quran if urgent measures were not taken, he therefore advised Abu Bakr, which is the successor of the Prophet's throne after his death, to compile the Quran into a single volume. Abu Bakr was convinced because of Umar's point and instructed Zayd bin Thabit, which was the Prophet's chief secretary, to carry out the assignment of compiling the content into a single volume. And thereafter the Quran was kept, that is after the compilation, with Abu Bakr. And later on the Quran was passed on to Umar, the second successor of the Prophet. And later the Quran was passed on, that is the compiled one was passed on to Umar's daughter named Hafsa. During the time of Umar as the successor, the leader of the Muslim community, the community began to expand into different parts of the Arabian nation, even outside the Arabian nation, Byzantine Empire, the Persian Empire, and the likes. And there were notices of different variations in reciting the Quran, and this called for the standardization of the Quran, that is, to be able to recite the Quran in one single dialect. And this was done during the time of Rahman, the third successor of the throne of leadership of the Prophet. Standardizing the Quran arose so that there won't be corruption that will be creeping into the Quran. Thereafter, how was the Quran standardized? Number one of the ways with which the Quran was standardized was the appointment of a commission headed by Zayd bin Thabit. Now you will remember that Zayd bin Thabit has been or was the chief secretary of the Prophet. So because of that, he was made the head of the committee appointed to provide a single standardized Quran. Not only that, the second thing that was done to standardize the Quran was the withdrawal of the compiled copy with Hafsa. So the compiled copy with Hafsa was withdrawn for the use of the committee. Likewise, the committee produced a standard copy, which is known as the Ottomanic edition. This edition is the one that is still in use to the present time. In addition, several copies of that standardized copy of the Quran was made and distributed to different provinces of Islam, and this led to them withdrawing or collecting the previously made copies and destroyed them. So in essence, the Quran has been standardized within 7 years after the death of the Prophet. And this will bring us to the next discussion, which is the authenticity of the Quran. And when we say the authenticity of the Quran, what does that mean? It means that the Quran was truly a revelation from Allah, a revelation that was sent to mankind through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only that, it also has no interpolation. That is, it has never been tampered with by anybody. It also means that the Quran remains as original as it was revealed by Allah. Likewise, it means no amendment has been made to the Quran, either subtraction or addition of the content. None of such has ever happened to the Quran. It also means that the Quran is the last testament of Allah to humanity. Likewise, it contains the exact words of Allah. That is to say, you cannot find any word in the Quran and would be ascribed to any person other than Allah. And you might ask, but it was the Prophet that said it was. Yes, it is. The Prophet has only been used as a medium to pass the message of Allah to humanity. But the words in the Quran are not of the Prophet. And any word that would be ascribed to the Prophet is referred to as the Hadith. So what then are the evidences that prove the authenticity of the Quran? The Quran itself proves its authenticity. Even though the Prophet was used as a medium to pass the messages of the Quran, he has never been a learned before the revelation of the Quran. He was known to be unlettered. So for someone to be unlettered, how could they compose the comprehensive messages of the Quran? Secondly, he was known to be honest, even among his peers. And because of that, he has been nicknamed as a trustworthy, even before the advent of Islam, during his youthful days. So when he uttered that he was receiving a revelation from the angel, quite a number of people accepted him because they have never known him to be a false bearer. In addition to that, the propagation of the Islamic message brings to him insults, insecurities, and persecution from his enemies, those that did not believe in what he was preaching, Islam. And it will be difficult for someone to be telling lies and be facing such kind of insecurities. That means the person will be a stupid person. In the Quran, we have some events that were predicted, which after revelation came to pass. And such is the one revealed in Quran chapter 30 verse 23, which predicted the victory of Roman Empire over Persia. And this was after the Persians had defeated it, that is the Romans. This prophecy came to pass 7 years after the verse was revealed, that is in the year 622 CE. Another evidence is that the Quran never have a part contradicting another part of itself. Furthermore, there are some scientific discoveries which later came up after the revelation of the Quran. And the Quran testified to such discoveries, some of which are the ones confirmed in Quran chapter 21 verse 30, which says that all living things took their root from water. Scientific discoveries have proven this. Likewise, this has been stated in the Quran. And this will take us to the next discussion, which is the Makkah and Medina surahs. In the Islamic history, there are two periods when we refer to as the periods of revelation. These periods can be referred to as the period when the Prophet was still in Mecca, and this was before his migration, and the period after his migration from Mecca to Medina. So this period are called the Meccan period and the Medinan period. So in Mecca, he spent 13 years to receive the revelations of the Quran, and in Medina, he spent 10 years. So altogether, the period of revelation is 23 years. What then are the characteristics of the Meccan surahs? As has been said earlier, the Meccan surahs are those surahs that were revealed while the Prophet was still in Mecca. That was his early stage of prophethood. And these surahs are known to be generally short. Likewise, the language used in this surah are poetic in nature, and most of them begins with oaths, or they are full of oaths. Likewise, the sentences used in this surah are majorly short. And of course, because it was the beginning of Islam, so we have warning of hell for the evildoers and promising of paradise for those who do good. And these are the major characteristics of the Meccan surah. And for the Medinan surahs, the discussions usually revolve around the social matters, economic, political, and military matters. And this is so because this time the Prophet has organized Islam, that it is Medina, as an Islamic state. So everything that revolves around the revelation then used to be around all these matters. So this will take us to the characteristics of the Medinan surahs. Number one is that the surahs are generally long in nature compared to Meccan surah. Likewise, the surahs also made references to battles that are fought, during when the Prophet was in Medina. So the first battle was fought after he arrived in Medina. Therefore, the content that talks about battle are Medinan surahs. Furthermore, the surahs that were revealed in Medina address the faithfuls and the people of the books.